Welcome back. It is still Tuesday, October 21st, 2014. This is still the morning edition, and last I checked, I'm still Yael Levi. Thank you for staying with us. On to our next topic. It's a very controversial one. It combines art and ideology and raises the question about the connection and legitimacy between the two. Now, some big-name politicians are joining Jewish protesters in a growing firestorm against an opera. Yes, an opera. They say glorifies Palestinian terrorists. Former New York Mayor Rudy Giuliani, former New York Governor George Pataki, and 2 U.S. congressmen were among hundreds expected outside, actually protesting outside the Metropolitan Opera to protest the Met premiere of the death of Klinghoffer, which premiered last night in New York. And we are happy, very happy, to be joined in studio by i24 News culture correspondent Shachar Peled. Shachar, thank you for being with us. Before anything else, let me start by saying I've missed you.
Oh, I missed you too. Good morning, Yael.
Thank you, because you're one of my favorite correspondents who will help us make sense of this very bizarre story of an opera being very controversial.
Yes.
What stands behind it?
Not another night in the opera, I might
Yes.
say. Absolutely not. The Metropolitan Opera in New York actually braced itself to one of the stormiest opening nights in decades, in fact. Hundreds of protesters stood in front of the Lincoln Center where it premiered yesterday, The Death of Klinghoffer. It's a John Adams opera, who's already known for his political operas, but we'll get to that. And it deals with the 1985 hijacking by Palestinian guerrillas of a cruise ship, and it
called Aquila Laura. Let's remind people. I mean, first of all, the story itself, Aquila Laura. What happened in 1985?
Exactly. So what happened is that they hijacked a ship. On it was Leon Klinghoffer, a Jewish American resident, with his wife, and they decided to they killed him, and they decided to throw his body off the ship with his wheelchair. He was a handicapped man. So part of the protest was, in fact, 100 wheelchairs, symbolic wheelchairs, to protest this opera.
No, it's a terrible. I mean, there's a picture that we can't show. It's quite gruesome. That's of him actually almost being killed. It was a very vivid picture for people in 1985. Remember before exactly. And here we're looking at a picture of his wife actually.
Yes, right after the incident, and this caused so much debate and so much headlines back in the day. 6 years later, in 1991 production began. This was the same production. John Adams' opera is
6 years after.
Exactly, only 6 years after. Back then, it wasn't that controversial. First of all, it premiered in Brussels, so it didn't attract that much attention. It moved then.
We're not making light of it. But it was in Belgium.
It moved then to Brooklyn, New York, where the daughters started to become outraged by this production. So it isn't the first time it becomes this controversial opera, but now the decision of the Met to once again produce it has caused this peak of outrage and upset from Jewish groups, from Rudolph Giuliani, former mayor of New York, who spoke in front of these protesters, saying this is in fact terrorism. Now, this opera stands on the thin line, some might say, on the thin line between terrorism and heroism. A warrior of one side is a criminal of the other, because some say this is a humane masterpiece, a way of expressing what happened there in trying to explain what happened there in a more humane way. Others say this is a voice for terrorism, and this is inexplicable.
And how? Because I'm going to raise the question. I'm assuming the Jewish community in New York, his daughters. How can you portray in a humane way? A 69. How old was Leon Klinghoffer?
Yes, he was something like that. He was in his 60s.
Crippled man being shot in the head and thrown overboard.
So they say this doesn't give voice to terrorism, and it doesn't represent it, and it doesn't rationalize it. They say it's a freedom of speech that the opera deserves as well. And part of the anti-protesters, there was another group, a small group of
course it is New York.
Handful of people exactly protesting against the demonstration. And even a mayor, Bill de Blasio, criticized former mayor Rudolph Giuliani for taking part in this fiasco, because this has become really a festival of hate alongside real criticism over art, because there was booing in the middle of the show. There was a man during a quiet moment shouting, "The murder of Klinghoffer will never be forgiven." This became an entire show outside of the show, and this is definitely not what the Met wanted. When they advertised this opera, they said see it, then decide. So they knew in advance that.
Well,
this
in many
would
ways, it
cause
also raises see it then decide is a great. I have to say, it's actually a great advertising line.
Absolutely.
Once something creates controversy and traction, and of course people are going to be interested.
They knew it would raise a lot of controversy, and they wanted people to first give it a chance, and this of course brought people into the audience. There was a full crowd, was a full evening. Many people, because of the attention it attracted, wanted to come and see what was all the fuss about.
What's the fuss about? And I'm wondering, first of all, when you say, before we touch on John Adams real quickly, when you say that, they say that the opera itself is a humane story, I mean, is it leaning towards somebody? And what are the daughters saying about the opera this time around?
Well, those who say it's a humanist masterpiece say it gives a voice also to Klinghoffer's story. I mean, they say this is a good chance to hear about the man Leon Klinghoffer and see what happened to him, and not only the terrorist guerrilla, the Palestinian guerrilla groups, who some say this is a voice for them as well. The daughters, first of all, we must give credit to the Met, who gave a passage in the playbill itself to the daughters, in addition to many editorials they wrote. In it, they write a message saying the opera presents false moral equivalencies without context. So they are very much against the opera, and the Met gave them
a stage, gave them within the playbill
to say what they had to say. Once again, I think everyone understands how problematic this opera is, and it brings the Met the attention it wants, but also they give stage to other ideas and other concepts and other ideologies. Regarding John Adams, he's actually a veteran composer with many operas, mainly political operas in his background. So, for example, and the Met already produced some of his compositions. Dr. Atomic, for example, about the first atomic bomb, was one of his first operas.
Great
We've got Nixon in China.
Nixon in China.
Nixon in China is one of the operas, and a Pulitzer-winning opera on the transmigration of souls, commemorating victims of September 11th. So he touches and deals.
It's interesting that you say that, because Tony and I, leading up to this segment, walking to the studio, were discussing is 9/11 a PC subject for an opera?
Or if it is the Met, the world's most prestigious opera house aside from La Scala, the appropriate venue? I mean, I think it's kind of like a dent in the prestige, and I think some New Yorkers maybe are reacting against that. Like, put it somewhere in Brooklyn, in some hipsterville.
Well, others might say this is exactly the stage that it deserves, because New York, a multicultural way of freedom of speech city, this is the place to be. This is in the center, in Midtown Manhattan, in fact, Lincoln Center. This is the place for such an opera to take place.
It seems to be the other side of that line, though, I think.
You're the other side.
Unless it's like Upper West Side, we're a heavily Jewish area of New York, too.
It's true. For
really
those of us who lived on the Upper West Side, and you're thinking, wow.
They wanted the attention. It was intentionally put there, in fact, to drive maybe the protesters and the demonstrations. When did we talk about an opera recently?
That's true.
This is part of the thing, that a protest in front of an opera, this is news. So
this is very true, and I'm glad you're raising that. But as you mentioned, it's also it's the place in New York, and the only thing that comes to mind, they protested, then went to Zabar's. But probably. Okay, we had to or Whole Foods. You never know. Whatever. But very true. Speaking about an opera, and I think that's. In many ways, that's what John Adams was,
Exactly. What he was aiming, though, in many interviews, he was very surprised by the hysteria. He called it a hysteria. He saw one of the newspapers, he said in an interview, he saw on a train one of the newspapers, and the headline with his name and the opera on it. He was very surprised that this was the attention it got. Okay. So he wasn't so thrilled by this protest.
But still, tickets, I'm sure, are being sold. Shachar Peled, thank you. And you're locked in the studio with us.